Welcome to the Developers Who Test podcast, a podcast for developers who embrace test automation so that they can ship better quality software and have more fun doing it. I'm your host, Chris Harbert, and I'm here today with Igor Dorovskikh, founder and CEO of Ingenious, a high-growth mobile development startup with amazing customers like Apple and Grammarly. Today's episode of the Developers Who Test podcast is brought to you by Testery.com. Whether you're a developer who has just a handful of tests or even thousands, then your tests deserve to be running on the fastest and most reliable platform for open source testing. With AI-driven insights and analytics, unparalleled parallelism, and awesome integrations, Testery enables you to get more from your tests. Check us out today at Testery.com. Today we're speaking with Igor about the challenges of mobile testing. Welcome to Developers Who Test, Igor.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I think, the question I always like to start out with is how did you find yourself doing what you're doing today, being so involved in the test automation world, but also mobile development?
Great question, Chris. I have started my career in testing back in 2007, and I started right from mobile before the era of iPhones and Android. And it just, I guess, was a destiny. So, when the first Android came out, 2008 G1, I already started looking at testing those devices. And gradually segue into the iOS world in 2011, 2012. Before, when people thought about testing and test automation of mobile devices, I already was doing that. Unfortunately, the industry wasn't mature with the tooling for that. As the industry became more mature and frameworks started coming in, I became more interesting in testing and optimizing my testing with test automation. If you remember those frameworks such as Robotium for Android back 2009, 2010, before Espresso, and for I think iOS and Android, when Appium first came out, I met Jonathan Lips in 2013 in the GTAC, and he got me into the Appium world, and I was a huge evangelist of Appium from 2013 until probably 2016. So I just got dragged to the industry, and my entire career was in mobile space, so it was no brainer, and I truly enjoyed the mobile development because I believe that testing is not by itself is just a separate entity. It's part of the whole development process, and mobile testing is not easy. That's why I don't see much talks about mobile testing. It's mostly web in the world, and it's challenging. Not mentioning the fact of device segmentation that everybody have to deal with, and so many various versions of Android. So yeah, I love the challenges. I love the mobile industry. And at the end of the day, everybody's doing everything on mobile phones nowadays. So here I am.
Yeah, it's remarkable to hear that your career in mobile testing got started before Android and iOS. So you've been with it for the whole ride, which is really pretty incredible. So you mentioned a few different ways of doing mobile testing, in that including Appium as well as native. I think one of the biggest questions people have when they're getting started with mobile testing is, do I need emulated devices, real devices? Is it all going to be manual testing? And then they stumble on Appium, which is, basically like the Selenium equivalent for mobile testing. Can you describe your experiences with Appium? And I think you mentioned you were a fan from 2013 to 2016. Does that mean you're not a fan anymore? And maybe why?
Yes, absolutely. The very important fact you have to understand that when you are thinking about mobile testing, there is no a cookie cutter approach. It's not like one size fit all, right? So you found Appium or any framework is going to work for you out of the box. So a lot of folks come to me with the same question, the same you just asked. What should I do? I think initially you have to start manually. You have to. Don't think about automation whatsoever when you start. You have to understand what you're dealing with. Now, how the mobile application was built. Is it the hybrid app? Is it the cross-platform app? such as there's Flutter, for instance, right? That's what I'm talking about, cross-platform. Or it's natively built. And when you start talking to developers and try to understand the technology behind the mobile application, then you start thinking about the approach. Every app is different. Some app is more front-end driven. Some apps are purely back-end, and the front end is just a lightweight facade. So every mobile application is a different beast and have different approach. So first, manual process. You have to be part of the software development lifecycle as a tester. So you have to figure out how you become less bottleneck for the team initially. That's the first thing. And obviously to keep the quality high. And I'm not talking about functional testing only. We're talking about all tests in a test pyramid pertain to the front-end testing of mobile applications, such as UI validation, right? Is the UI comply with the design? Functional testing, which I mentioned earlier. Accessibility testing. A lot of companies get sued millions of dollars and not comply with accessibility, AA, AAA compliance. Analytics, and I'm not talking about back analytics. Is the client actually firing the right analytics? You have to use the Charles or any proxy tool to see what's actually coming on your device. Performance testing. Again, when people talk about performance testing on mobile phones, they think about performance on the back end using a load runner. Or JMeter, right? No, I'm not talking about that type of performance of the backend or APIs. We're talking about front-end performance, like cold start measurement, KPIs. Is the app launches instantaneously? It takes 10 seconds on the first cold launch. And what is actually related to that delay? Is it images loaded from local storage? Maybe, what's going on there? So there's a profiling tool ships with every IDE like Xcode and Android Studio. Start learning about environments of working. So if you're Android tester or both Android and iOS tester, learn those environments, how to use a profiler for memory. So that's the first thing. I wouldn't worry about automation. But once you master your, the whole manual process or semi-automated process of testing all these things I mentioned, and there are more. I just scratched the surface. I'm just saying these basic things. Then you start thinking about automation. And then when I mentioned about depends how the application is built, this is built 100% natively. Means that it was built in, if it's iOS, in Swift, using Xcode or SDK, and then I would definitely recommend go for native solution, which ships with that SDK. For instance, XUA Test is an amazing library. It's built on top of XU Test. It works in the same code base, as the developers. Your code review can be reviewed by developers, the same language. You're gonna talk the same context as when you were gonna build your automation. So similarly for Android, Espresso doing the same thing. You're going to get a hello support from the team. Plus, you're going to get the updates with the Xcode or the Android Studio. When the new SDK gets shipped from the Apple or Google, you're going to use all the advantages right away.
Do you typically see one developer who is doing both the iOS and Android versions of the apps, or do you tend to see those get distributed to different teams? And the reason I ask is, one of my typical recommendations when people ask, what language should I test the software in? I say, well, what language are the developers using? And in the case of mobile, the language is different depending on where you're deploying it, which isn't the case with a lot of other software these days. So is that typically the same person or is it a different person?
It depends. That's actually your question segue back to the your previous question about Appium, right? I'm still a fan of Appium and where the Appium was actually helpful. I think that if the application, again, built cross-platform, means it's built in JS, like React Native, for instance, right? And cross-compile binary to iOS and Android, then I would recommend to use Appium. In this case, one tester will be enough, or one automation engineer. Because think about this, the application built pretty much similarly. I mean, there's going to be merely no difference. Great example, bank applications. They build them that way. They don't need to be heavy on UI. They don't need the crazy animation on or gorgeous, look. They are basically serving the purpose of informative kind of approach, right? So in that way, Appium is a perfect tool, and I still recommend to use it. And it's going to work very well for those type of applications. However, if we go to 100% native world where applications are unique, they're heavy on UI, there's a lot of animation, there's a lot of heavy on UI interactions, right? In that case, I sincerely recommend to use native solution. And that's where the SDET role comes from. And there's a major difference between automation engineer and SDET. If you read the book, How Google Tests Software, which is kind of a Bible for many testers, they actually distinguish those roles. They're not coming from Google originally. I think Microsoft invented SDET. In that case, you have to, you probably have no choice, but just test one thing. So basically, you become a developer of that platform. So you go in depth of that platform. So let's say that if it's IIS, you have to go in depth into the whole IIS stack. You have to learn about Xcode, IIS development. You have to learn about libraries. You will deal with every aspect of that. You have to learn the code base of the application, not maybe in depth, but you have to understand where the, depends on architecture, if it's MVVM or clean architecture, where the thing's located, where the view controllers, where the logic of application, if it's modular app or it's monolithic app, you have to learn all these things because you're going to work with that. And then again, that's where you become an expert. So in that case, there will be two SDETs working, one on iOS, one on Android. If you try to do both, you will fail 100% because you probably never have seen the developers that do both iOS and Android development, and they're good at this. Similar with the SDET role. That's why they exist as a software developer engineering test as the position, right? Then you can achieve that, by that expertise, you can achieve the stability and speed of your test. In my experience, I've noticed that folks that are trying to scatter across, they try to do web, iOS, Android, eventually they hit the brick wall, is because they're not good at anything. They just basically try to learn basics, and they have the lack of architecture, lack of knowledge in architecture of that specific platform. They don't understand the application on the test, and eventually they become victims of that. I also notice a lot of managers push for this, which is, I think, personally not the right approach. I think you have to, if you're on the web, stay on the web, good at this, learn JS, use like either Selenium or Cypress or Playwright. If you are an IIS, use IIS only for at least 1 year or two until you feel really confident with that platform, similar to Android. That's my prescription. Or if it's cross-platform, use Appium.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. In a previous episode, I mentioned the whole dynamic between being a generalist versus being a specialist, and sometimes the business pushes us to be generalists, where we know a little bit about everything, and it simplifies different things like planning, because you don't have to send a unit of work to one team and then hand it off to another team, and it minimizes silos and handoffs. So there's a lot of good aspects of being a generalist. But at the same time, there are certain places where it makes sense to have specialized knowledge. And I feel like you're bringing up the native mobile testing for Android and native mobile testing for iOS are complex enough domains that it really is hard to be good enough at both of them at the same time. And then, oh, by the way, they might be piling on top of that not just mobile testing, but we want you to know load testing, performance testing, functional web testing, and we want you to spend a third of your time doing manual testing for exploratory or accessibility or look and feel type things. So I'm glad that you bring that up, that this is one of those areas where specialization really can make sense.
Indeed, what you mentioned is absolutely true. It comes from experience in working with different vendors, look at how different teams are structured. Even in my career, when I was working full time for the companies, I've seen the same issue with that. And that's when I was building teams, I was trying to build the vertical specialty rather than horizontal coverage, like was just having this universal soldiers. Eventually, that model fails, and it's very hard to scale in terms of like test coverage on different aspects of the test pyramid. Yes, nothing else to add.
Yeah, so taking that specialized knowledge and experience you've got, let's say I'm looking at a new mobile app and I'm trying to decide, what approach to testing should I use? Should I do native testing? Should I use emulated devices, real devices, or manual testing? What are some of the features you look for in an application that might tell you, like, hey, we need a more specialized approach here?
No, absolutely. And that's why I mentioned and again, I repeat myself, a lot of times, especially rookies or beginners, right? They jump into test automation without learning the platform fundamentals and mobile testing approach. For the matter of fact, I have difficulty when I have hiring contractors for the company. For me to hire a mobile tester is a nightmare. A lot of people say, "Yeah, I know mobile testing." It's like, okay, I can explain what exactly you know, and usually I find out they know just functional testing, basically a user face testing. But if you go like a little bit in depth, they know nothing. So there's a huge gap in knowledge in the industry. If you're talking about, if you take like let's say 10,000 random testers from the entire industry, you're gonna find out that the very few individuals know like a mobile testing approach, like in depth. For that reason, coming back to your question, right? How should I know what should I use? What approach should I use for mobile testing? Should I use a physical device or should I use emulation? That's why you have to build the manual process first. You have to diagnose on the microscope what beast you're dealing with, what this whole application about. If it is VPN application, right? You will need a real device. You cannot emulate VPNs, period. So then you will have to deal with physical devices. Most likely, you will have to build a lab with routers or some way like to test VPNs. If it is a game application, right? It depends also like how it's heavy. You may be emulated. It all depends like on the application itself. If, as I mentioned, it's a financial app or a credit union or anything, bank app, then you probably don't need a real device. You can test everything on simulators and emulators if necessary. In terms of device segmentation, my recommendation to look at analytics in the Play Store or App Store. And there's a lot of if you use the Firebase, you can get analytics from there as well. You need to understand what are the let's say top 10 devices being used by your platform, and you'll be surprised. A lot of customers that I work with have done a common mistake. They try to purchase the most, the latest devices, which is the wrong idea. You want to look at analytics, you'll be surprised, especially if you run your app in different countries. Nobody will use iPhone 15. It's going to be like a very small percentage. It's mostly going to be iPhone 13, 12. So look at analytics, understand what the heaviest usage on the devices. Purchase those devices only. Same thing on emulation. Same thing on OS versions. Use analytics to determine that. I call it analytics-driven approach for testing.
Yeah, I feel like that is super critical from a user experience perspective. Sometimes also functional perspective. But typically, if something works on the older technology, it's going to work pretty well or better on the new technology. That's obviously not always true, and that's part of why we test things. But it's more, I would say it's more likely if something works on a phone that's 4 years old, it's still going to work on the new phones than it is if it works on the new phones, is it still going to work on the phone that's 4 years old? And I feel like that's applicable to other types of devices too. So like now my TV is only a couple years old, but it's a so-called smart TV, and people are shipping all these new apps for the smart TV, and then now all of a sudden they don't perform well, or you click on a button and nothing happens. And it's like, oh, well, their developers have the latest and greatest of everything. And so that's what they made sure that it worked on. So I love that you're taking an analytics driven approach to deciding what platforms to test. Do you think testing on multiple platforms is for everybody? Do you think there are certain companies where it's more important than others? Or do you think anybody who's shipping a mobile app really should be doing tests across multiple versions of multiple devices?
Yes, I think that is absolutely necessary to understand what the user is going to be testing on. I mean, using the app on, not testing. So that's why, again, I'm going to come back to analytics approach, because it can change. Not just revisit it like every 6 months. I would revisit every quarter, because that data could change with the new device introductions, OS versions upgrades. I mean, like, my mom upgrades OS version like every 2 years whenever it's necessary, right? So she's not clicking like update to the new OS version. So usually companies support 2 to 3 OS versions, going from the latest to the previous ones in the descending order. In terms of the device, same thing. Don't go crazy. Buy the most necessary devices, physical devices, because you have to test like on real devices, and then emulate other ones. Thanks God, nowadays we have such a huge competition in device cloud. There's no shortage of that. Google Device Cloud, right? You can use that. AWS Device Cloud, Headspin, SaaS Labs, Browser Stack. I can go on and on. So, if you really need you don't have the device and want to test on it, there's no shortage of that. And plus, you can even do it manual. You don't have to automate it. I mean, personally, automation on real devices on the cloud is extremely slow. I tried all of the platforms I mentioned. They're very flaky, most of them, because the orchestrations of physical devices is a very tedious and cumbersome process. So you cannot guarantee like a stability, plus the delays on the network. Some of them you have to load the app and the test right on the device. So like it does on Google Device Cloud. But you can leverage those platforms for coverage. Don't go like and buy all the devices, because you have to buy them every year or every 6 months. It's not scalable solution. Buy what's necessary, test on it.
I feel like if I were at a large company, it would be like there'd be a program where people donate their old phones to the testing department. So
We
like
did
pay
it.
employees to donate their old phones so that we could build the lab out of it.
Yeah, the labs, the problem, yeah, be careful with that. I personally run to, again, to the issues with building local device farms. They're extremely heavy on maintenance. So, think about this. You need to buy smart charger hubs. You have to build, you have to work with IT ops to create device management software. I mean, or use existing device management software. Otherwise, your device is going to get lost pretty quickly. You have to build like a cage with a security on it. So there's a lot of headache and overhead work. Plus the batteries get bloated over the year. You have to replace batteries, because even smart chargers are still chargers. Yeah, I mean, you can run. That's why I'm not recommend to go crazy about this. Use a few devices that are. And another approach that I've noticed, like for instance, if the testing team is big enough, and if you have like 10 plus testers on the team, you can use basically a device diversification by purchase. So every tester has different devices. You can do that as well. They have like 2-3 different phones, and multiply by 10. Now you have like 30 devices.
Yeah, I've seen that approach work surprisingly well with web testing, where you look around and, like, let's face it, pretty much everybody uses Chrome when you're a software developer. And we would occasionally find issues that didn't work in Internet Explorer or Safari. you don't necessarily have to run every regression test you have on every single device. It kind of depends on what kind of company you are, right? So, like, if you're a big multinational company with millions of users, it might make a whole lot of sense for you to run everything on every browser, and you can probably afford to do it. If you're a smaller startup, that might not even be an option for you, right? And so, one thing that I've seen work surprisingly well is just say, hey, each developer is going to use a different browser, and let's have each developer look at the new feature at least once before it goes live. And you can catch a surprising number of cross-browser issues that way. So I like the idea of doing that with your mobile testing as well, because not every company can afford to, even with the emulated device farms, or especially with the real devices, afford to run every test on every platform.
Indeed. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm a big fan of testathons. Basically, before every release, and if the company release weekly or bi-weekly, doesn't matter, you basically bring the entire team or pod, any functional team. Usually the teams are small size anyway, like functional teams, they're like 5 to maximum 10 people. So you sit down together and prepare a plan of just testing new features. And because everybody, like you said, gonna have different phones, developers, product managers, testers, everybody who's in your team can test it out. Amazingly, you learn about the product, you learn about the new feature, and people who even did not develop that feature are going to learn about that feature, going to discover different bugs. And I think that's the approach that testathons are phenomenal. I don't know why a lot of teams don't do that, but if you are engineering manager or product manager of that team and running that team, I highly recommend testathons and using the approach we just mentioned of having everybody having different devices.
Yeah, that whole mob testing approach is really pretty interesting, and I've seen it done in a few different ways. I've seen where you set up devices or browsers in the hallway, and you just say to anybody in the company, like, "Hey, if you walk by, try out this new feature. Here's what's going to ship next week. Let us know if you find anything." And it's very like informal, but you'll find people like salespeople wanting to know like what's about to come out, or marketing people wanting to check and see if the developers did it the way they thought they would do it, and those types of approaches can be surprisingly effective. Or getting a handful of people into a meeting room and having them all test the same things. You'll find that when you do it that way, people start having a conversation about it. Like, "Hey, did you notice such and such?" And then somebody else is like, "Oh, wait, yeah, I'll fix that like right now." uh,
Absolutely. You're
and it's
absolutely
just so
right.
cool to see the collaborative approach produce different results than what you would get if it's, I pick up my ticket from my ticketing system, I read the description, I implement automated tests, and that's the only testing that ever takes place. So, um,
Yes, and especially teams that have a shortage of QA, and we know that a lot of organizations don't spend a lot of budgets on quality teams. So I recommend those teams to leverage everybody, and like I said, mob testing approach, or we call testathons, helps a lot during these releases. And don't do it like just every like major release. I recommend to do it every release. And yeah, like for instance, mind maps. Use mind maps if you don't have those test cases written well, so everybody can read them. Then mind maps phenomenally used. You just say, okay, you use that flow, you Joe use that flow, and I'll use that flow. Let's go, and you collaborate. And it has to be live. Testathon must be live. I mean, virtually live or like physically in the room live, like a war room, but it has to be live so people can talk. And like you said, people discover so many things, and developers feel a little bit like, I wouldn't say ashamed, but like a little pressure that, okay, I'm gonna go fix it right now. It's amazing psychological effect. Yes, absolutely.
yeah, yeah, it is. It does make some of it more personal, which sometimes, sometimes quality isn't just about uh, checking all the boxes. Sometimes quality is really about, the user experience, and it's hard to capture the user experience through automation. But you can more easily capture it through demos, retrospectives, testathons, hallway testing, where you're getting people actually interacting with things. And I think since our topic today is mobile testing, I think those approaches are obviously applicable to all kinds of testing. But when it comes to mobile testing in particular, and given the challenges of automating mobile testing, it really could be a good opportunity for people to experiment more with that approach. So, I like that idea quite a bit.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that idea.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that, you have a really hard time finding qualified mobile testers. What are maybe some of the questions that you ask that people have difficulty answering or have a huge knowledge gap around?
Yeah, I think that all the topics were already touched during today's call. I mean, during today's interview, right? Um, because when people, again, I'm going to mention again and again, there's a lot of people when talk about testing, they talk in context of functional testing. Basically, test the functionality of the features. That's about it. But when we talk about the platform-specific questions, right, or IaaS, like integration with the other native applications, if the apps is, integrating. Think about like device fragmentation aspect we also touched today. Client analytics, device performance. I mean, the test itself. People don't think about battery, right? People don't think about memory consumption because devices are all different, right? Camera integration and so on and so forth. Now talking about like thoroughly testing that, right? Use the Charles with to intercept network events. You have to be comfortable to set up with this. Another thing is in the mobile testing is very important aspect is different interruptions, right? For instance, you on an application, the phone call comes, right? It's not going to happen very usually in the browser, right? On the web app. So those aspects, those approaches, fundamentally know how to debug if it's a client side issue, if it is the issue on a mobile app or it's a backend. Again, how you're going to do that. Be comfortable to go inside of the device. Like if it's Android, you can have a full control of device using Android debugging bridge, ADB, right? You can go and look at the local database, local storage, see why the heavy images stored locally. Why? I mean, you can do that. You can analyze that. So when talking about those different toolings available for mobile application and approaches and techniques, people usually use the approach from web testing and try to apply that in the mobile testing. Things going to work, but it's not. And we mentioned like how to pick another great question. A lot of people failing, right? How to pick the right devices and OS versions. What are you going to do, right? Are you going to test on all of them? Usually people say, I'm going to buy the latest device. And that's what developers do. Developers usually buy the latest device and they develop on it. And then you go backward to the 3-4 versions of previous phone. It's not going to work. And they use the latest SDK, right, for development. Is it going to be backward compatible?
I think that brings up an interesting point. Like, maybe for mobile testing, the functional testing is the least important kind of testing. Because you mentioned a few different things there. Obviously performance is huge in this world of like clickable. If I download an app and I try to open it and it doesn't load in 15 seconds, I might never download the app again. I'm not even going to rate it poorly. I'm just not going to use it, right? Like people swipe and move on a mobile device a lot more than they might on a website. And I like that you brought up the interactions between things. I mean, we're living in such a connected world now that your phone might be connected to your computer and your car and your TV and I mean, heck, probably like even microwaves and refrigerators now. And
IoT, yes,
so,
IoT is a big thing. Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
and so with that connectivity and the fact that everybody's fighting over your Bluetooth at the same time, there's different versions of Bluetooth. It feels like there's so many different things you could test in the mobile world that may have very little to do with the functionality. And when the developers are creating functionality, that's what they're building, so that's what they're focused on, right? But they're not taking the step back and thinking, okay, is that functionality going to work on these different versions of devices? Is it going to work when these other events are taking place or these other applications are installed? Um, so I think that's a really interesting takeaway for folks, is just how much testing can we do that isn't about the functionality, but is still incredibly valuable.
Oh yeah, I mean you're absolutely right. Functionality is, I wouldn't say it's least important. It's important, but it's touched by everybody on the team. Product who tests a feature
Mhm.
will touch it. Developer will definitely go like through the happy path flow multiple times during development. Everybody on the team. That's why like we talk about testathons and how important they are. And those functional flows will be tested. Another thing that when we spoke about analytics driven testing, if its feature is not new, if it's the already settled feature, you want to ask your analytics team to draw your diagram how actually the users are using it. So they can pull the data from the whatever used for analytics events, right? To store that. And you'll be surprised when you testing things, you think that the user uses that application in such a way, and you might find out that the feature might not use at all. Like maybe like
Mm.
1% of user even touch it. Like for instance, a lot of people spend a lot of unnecessary testing, or what we call combinatorial explosion, testing everything and every feature, but then maybe it's not necessary. Maybe it's only
Mm.
like 0.01% of users will ever touch this feature. So use the analytics as your power tool and what to test and what's not. Functionally, we already mentioned, both of us, that yes, it is important, but people usually test those flows naturally. But nobody on the team gonna touch the aspects of UI, localization. Nobody tests about localization. Like
Mm.
we use like tools like Apple tools, for instance, to do localization testing, taking screenshots, right, and do image comparison, how it looks in different languages. Basically, we build leverage automation to take a screenshot on every screen in different locale, and you will see and Apple tools determine that. I mean, per
Mhm.
se, Apple tools functionize all the same thing, but you got idea. Similarly to accessibility. When people talk about accessibility, I don't know why they always talk about the voiceover. I said voiceover is like 1/10 of accessibility, if not
Mm.
1/20th. Accessibility, color gradient, color blinded people.
Mhm.
Were the guidelines used for building color, a gradient? Maybe this button will never be seen by a person who's colorblind. How are you gonna test it if you're not colorblind? Yeah,
Mhm.
those aspects you bring up, and people never think about them ever, right? So you're absolutely right. Performance is a huge thing on mobile. I don't know why it's completely neglected. I mean, I think that one of the companies that put a huge emphasis on Headspin on it. I think initially the idea was running app in different countries because they put physical boxes and data centers with the SIM cards of that that locale of that region, so you can
Mm.
physically see how the app is going to function in Singapore because the device actually in Singapore data center with a SIM card. And it's like, okay, that's how the app going to function. And people find out the CDN issues, right? And you're going to see how they're
Yeah.
going to perform on that. And they give you the whole perform like vertical stack of a performance. Like you said, if the application takes 20 seconds to load, you're going to delete it, put negative review, one
Mhm.
star review. Absolutely.
Yeah. For our audience, a CDN is a content delivery network that distributes your assets globally so that when you request them, you're not requesting them from some other part of the world. It's more geographically located.
Yeah, thank
So like
you.
that's a perfect example of an area a tester could help find uh, an opportunity for improvement if the device is going to perform one way in one part of the world and a different way in another part of the world. Uh, it would be good to know that you could implement a CDN to improve that performance if you're not already. So, kind of last question I want to leave this off with is, okay, say I'm a developer and I've heard all of this stuff and I'm convinced we need to be doing more to test our mobile applications. But my company isn't doing anything at all for mobile testing. How do I personally develop my skills to improve my ability to test our applications? And how do I convince the company to start doing more of it?
I mean, usually it happens naturally when the hotfix rate goes, above the roof, and companies realize that they need to do something about this. They start ring the bell. They will come to the entire team. They start thinking for external and internal solutions. That's how I got the business, and it happens naturally. Usually, that a lot of companies, they think that they don't need testers at all because testers is a bottleneck. They slow down the process. Blah blah blah. You've heard the story many times. We can do everything with the development team. Those team eventually, when the application bloated, right, and it becomes hard for the release process to carry on, and hot fixes, again, I'm going to repeat myself, they're going to basically chalk them, and they're going to spend more time on hot fix releases and then regular release train. That's when the whole thing comes naturally. In terms of skills, there's a lot of resources online. For the matter of fact, we have Ingenious University where we teach the course on mobile testing and specifically on native mobile test automation. We do this for enterprises and individuals. It's extremely affordable. We just try to build a community around this and help people to go in depth. To be honest, there's not that many courses on automating mobile apps natively, like Espresso, XUI Test. There are very few. Because we've been doing this for many years as a consulting company, we bring that expertise into our courses. So our main goal is to teach the communities how it's done in the real world, and not the sunny days, like how it looks in the stormy day, dealing with all these aspects of analytics automation, how to get 98% stability, 99% stability, which is close to impossible, but we achieve that. We know how to do that. It's really hard. And as you know, Chris, yourself a very seasonal, experienced engineer. A lot of people, when they talk about testing, test automation, they talk in the general terms. Okay, you automate the feature, then what? But DevOps, test ops involved in the process of fine-tuning this process, mocking, and a lot of things. People never think about this, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's a whole different world." And that's when, again, I want to mention that you want to build a lie. Don't try to do it on your own. You want to basically, quality control is not quality assurance, right? Because usually quality assurance get delegated to the testers, but quality control is the responsibility of the entire team. So try to bring the entire team to this approach, like how we can improve all together in this process, and try to build the culture of quality in the team and work together, both with product design team, be part of it. Very important. People always neglect design testing. Are we following design guidelines? Is design identical to what we develop? It's not. There's so many design issues. So question designers too. So yeah, I think that's the best way. And when you said if you are a developer and thinking about mobile testing, I think besides developer, I think everybody else should think about the mobile testing on the team. Yeah, I mean, it's a iterative process. Start small. I recommend, again, coming back to our testathons, start with just testathons, just test like checklist, like basic, P0 use cases, and have fun, and see how the people get contagious with this and gonna like it, and then slowly, gradually move towards in-depth of all the aspects of mobile testing we discussed today for our audience.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We've been speaking with Igor Dorovskikh, who is the founder and CEO of Ingenious. They have a lot of really great resources on mobile test automation, and that's one thing they do really well for helping their clients with. So if you haven't checked them out, I highly encourage you to do so. And, I'm reminded that we all use mobile devices and we all experience painful interactions with those mobile devices every day. So if you need any encouragement that this is a big problem for your customers, just look at your own life and your interactions with your mobile devices. And then also remember the fact that, unlike websites, everybody installs an app from an app store, and that app store has a rating. And, it doesn't take too many bad releases to tank your rating. And so the importance of mobile testing is just so much more important because of how quickly your ratings can change in the app stores, and how important it is to get it right the first time, especially if you're launching a new app. So thank you, Igor, for coming on the show, and we'll look forward to seeing what's next for you.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. Thank you.